Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Jeju. Coming up in this edition, a South Korean court has issued a warrant to arrest impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol and search the presidential residence. Police in South Korea have vowed to speed up identification of the victims killed in a plane crash on the weekend. And a transit deal allowing Russia to export natural gas to Europe via Ukraine expires, though Russia and some European countries have made efforts to renew the deal. We begin in Asia. A South Korean court has issued a warrant to arrest impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol and search the presidential residence, but investigators have not set a schedule for the execution of the warrants. It marks the first time in modern history that South Korea has issued an arrest warrant against a sitting president. Yoon faces a criminal investigation into possible insurrection charges over his martial law declaration. Soo-Min Yu reports from Seoul.
This is a constitutional first for South Korea, which makes President Yoon Suk-yeol the first sitting South Korean president to face an arrest while in office. Now, the Seoul Western District Court has issued an arrest warrant earlier today against President Yoon Suk-yeol. Now, this warrant was requested by the Corruption Investigation Office for high-ranking officials and includes charges of insurrection and obstructing the exercise of rights through abuse of authority. Now, this comes after Yoon has rejected all three previous summons from the CIO to appear for questioning over the short-lived imposition of martial law. Now, the court has also approved a search warrant for the presidential residence in Hannam-dong Yongsan-gu district, where President Yoon has been staying. Now, the CIO is expected to move quickly to actually execute the arrest warrant and head to President Yoon's residence in Hannam-dong Yongsan-gu district to execute. But this is probably going to involve some high-stakes operation. Now, after the court's issuance of arrest warrant, an official from the Presidential Security Office has said that this will be taken in accordance with the due process regarding the search warrant. Concerns have been brewing over the potential clashes of Presidential Security Service, which has previously obstructed law enforcement efforts. Well, typically, an arrest warrant remains valid for 1 week from the date of issuance, but given the heightened level of security and resistance from the Presidential Security Service, the next 48 hours will be crucial. Now, President Yoon remains suspended from his duties following the impeachment by the National Assembly earlier this month, and the Constitutional Court has up to 6 months to rule on whether to uphold or overturn the impeachment. Now, acting President Choi Sang-mok has recently been booked by the police along with other high-ranking officials with charges relevant to insurrection, further complicating the matters. Now, the issuance of this arrest warrant is really sending shockwaves across the political circle as it signifies the gravity of this very case.
That was Soo-Min Yu in Seoul. Staying in South Korea, police have vowed to speed up identification of the victims killed in a plane crash on the weekend. The Jeju Air flight burst into flames after a failed landing attempt at Muan International Airport, killing 179 people. The airport will remain closed until January the 7th. Authorities are racing to uncover the cause of the tragedy as families demand answers. Shin Ham has details.
The fateful Jeju Air Flight 7C-2216 reportedly suffered a bird strike just minutes before touchdown. South Korea's transport ministry says the pilots declared an emergency and signaled their intent to go around.
08시 59분에
The control tower advised the pilot with the phrase, "Caution bird activity." At 8:59 a.m., the pilot reported an emergency declaration and go around due to a bird strike. The pilot declared "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday" 3 times and used the terms bird strike and go around.
Despite the warning, the plane belly landed and then skidded off the runway into a concrete embankment and erupted in flames. Experts are questioning why such a wall existed at the end of the runway, rather than safety systems designed to stop overrunning aircraft. Right now, the focus is on analyzing the cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, which sustained damage in the crash. Officials, meanwhile, say identifying all the victims may take days. All the while, families are demanding answers and support.
일일이 쪼각쪼각 맞춰야 되는 상황이에요, 지금.
The bodies are so severely damaged that we are in a situation where we need to recover and piece them together one by one. That's the current reality. Additionally, we have requested more medical personnel and resources to be deployed to this area.
South Korea's acting President Choi Sang-mok has ordered an emergency inspection of all airlines, beginning with the 101 Boeing 737-800 aircraft currently operated by South Korean carriers.
Since the accident occurred, we plan to conduct a special inspection of the B737-800 first, look closely at the maintenance management system, and decide on further measures.
As investigators examine potential mechanical failures in pilot decision-making, grieving families are left waiting for closure.
That was Xinhan reporting. In the Middle East, UN humanitarians warn that Israel's attacks in Gaza are dismantling the very means of survival in the Strip. They say Israel has been crippling humanitarian access and launching attacks on civilians, healthcare, and emergency services. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs issued warning following an Israeli raid on Kamal Adwan Hospital and the detention of 240 people, including the hospital's director. The WHO says the raid has forced the last major health facility in northern Gaza to close. Displaced Palestinians are also suffering from cold weather. There have been reports of newborns frozen to death amid bitter cold and lack of shelter. Rami Almagari reports from Han Yunis.
People here are unable to manage with the storms hitting the territory from time to time, especially during this winter time. Recently, the people had their tents torn apart because of the storm and the rains, the heavy rains that fell on them, on the tents in Deir al-Balah in Khan Yunis, and the flooding of the water, floods of the water enter their tents and waking them up forcibly in the middle of night. This situation is repeated in the territory amidst the lack of supplies needed to repair the tents that, according to local estimates, 80% of those tents that shelter about hundreds of thousands of people are being torn apart and need repair, immediate repair. This comes against the backdrop of United Nations suggestion or warnings, recent warnings by United Nations that hundreds of tons of supplies needed for the tents, and including blankets and other supplies needed for the shelters, for the shelter tents, are stuck on the border lines on the Egyptian side of the border because of the border closure, the Rafah terminal, crossing terminal. This is for the displaced people under these storms. Actually, in terms of the northern Gaza Strip hospitals and United Nations warnings against the Israeli actions against hospitals, today the Indonesian hospital in northern Gaza Strip was stormed, was actually surrounded by Israeli army, and 10 patients were transferred from the Indonesian hospital to the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Four of them were reportedly detained by the Israeli army. I also would like to note here that the Israeli media report suggests that 106 Palestinian militants have been killed in an Israeli raid from the sea and the air after these militants were preparing to leave the northern Gaza towards Gaza City. This is the situation, Jamie, for the time being in the Gaza Strip.
That was Rami Almagari in southern Gaza. Israel continues to target Syrian weapons and military infrastructure. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says an Israeli airstrike close to Damascus on the weekend killed at least 11 people. The Israeli military did not comment on the strike. Jonathan Regev has more from Tel Aviv.
Israeli forces are present in Syria. We do know that Israeli sources have said in the past, have been quoted as saying that until Israel understands that there's some responsible factor on the other side that can assume the power all over Syria, but especially on the border area, Israel has no plans to move. Therefore, at least for the moment, Israeli forces are staying there. There is some criticism, even from within the army, on the presence of Israeli forces in the area. There are officers within the army, unnamed officers, we have to say, that combat units should be fighting, should be in their combat positions in Gaza, and not sort of watching agriculturists who are working on the Syrian side of the border. This is what is being said among some officers of the Israeli army. But the official stance for now is that the IDF will maintain its presence on the Syrian side of the border, since Israel does not really know who is this regime on the other side, who are the people controlling there. We know that Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, for example, said that these are jihadist militants and Israel does not have faith in them for the moment, at least until there's some kind of a change in that policy, or until we know the direction that Syria is heading to. This will be the Israeli policy, and the IDF forces will remain in Syrian territory.
That was Jonathan Regev reporting in Tel Aviv. Turning to North America, many people around the world are remembering former U.S. President Jimmy Carter, who died at the age of 100 on Sunday. Jim Spellman has the story.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter leaves behind a legacy of promoting peace and international relations. In China, Carter is remembered for his role in normalizing relations between Washington and Beijing as president in the late 1970s, and he visited China multiple times after his time in office. In a statement, Chinese President Xi Jinping noted Carter's commitment to good relations between China and the U.S., and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs commented on Carter's passing.
China expresses deep condolences for the passing of former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. Former President Carter was a promoter and decision maker in establishing diplomatic relations between China and the U.S. He made significant contributions to the development of China-U.S. relations over the years.
In Europe, U.S. allies are praising Carter's legacy. On social media, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer noted Carter's selfless public service. French President Emmanuel Macron posted that Carter tirelessly fought for peace. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz wrote, "The world has lost a great mediator for peace in the Middle East and for human rights." As president, Carter focused on peace between Israel and Arab countries, culminating in the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel in 1978. And the historic peace treaty between the two countries that followed the next year.
So let us now lay aside war. Let us now reward all the children of Abraham who hunger for a comprehensive peace.
He remained committed to peace in the Middle East after his time in office, including visiting Gaza. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi wrote on X, his significant role in achieving the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel will remain etched in the annals of history, and his humanitarian work exemplified a lofty standard of love, peace, and brotherhood. And Carter's spirit will live on through the work of Habitat for Humanity, the nonprofit organization that builds houses for those in need in the U.S. and more than 70 countries around the world. Dating back to the 1980s, Carter could often be found volunteering for the organization. Jimmy Carter is remembered as a man who took on the biggest challenges on the world stage, but also as a man who led by example, living a humble life dedicated to serving others.
So I'd say peace and human rights and treating everybody the same has been what I hope will be my legacy.
That was a report on worldwide remembrance for former U.S. President Jimmy Carter. In Europe, a transit deal allowing Russia to export natural gas to Europe via Ukraine expires on Tuesday, though Russia and some European countries have made efforts to renew the deal. Johannes Plechberger has more from Austria, one of the countries most affected by the pipeline stoppage.
Austria's Baumgarten terminal is ready to receive its last gas flows from Russia. Despite previous transit stop announcements by Ukraine, Kyiv has so far never implemented them. But experts say this time is different.
Starting January 1st, 2025, it's our understanding that eventually, the Russian gas that's coming to Europe is going to stop completely.
Energy analyst Anna Subasic says efforts by Slovakia and Hungary to negotiate a new transit deal have likely not been successful. She's expecting Central and Eastern Europe to make the shift from Russian gas to liquefied natural gas coming from Northwestern Europe instead.
Europe will rely on a lot more LNG to kind of fill for this kind of loss that we are seeing from pipeline gas, which is around 15 BCM on a yearly basis.
gas flow through Ukraine accounts for around half of Moscow's pipeline exports to Europe. So after decades of cheap Russian gas, consumers in Central Europe now fear LNG imports will increase energy prices. At the beginning of December, Austria unilaterally cancelled its gas contract with Moscow after Russia's state-owned Gazprom had refused to supply gas to Austria's OMV company over payment disputes. Gazprom lost one of its few remaining long-term pipeline gas buyers in Europe. For 50 years, Austria sourced on average 80% of its gas supply from Russia.
That was Johannes Plechberger in Austria. And finally, in Africa, research from a global food monitor claims there are acute levels of hunger in 5 Sudanese regions. It says another 17 areas will face the threat of famine next year. But the Sudanese government has rejected the claims. The civil war between the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces has left millions of people displaced. Naba Muhyiddin has more from Port Sudan.
The Sudanese government has come out strongly against the latest report by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification System, or IPC, a standardized system thus designed to help governments, UN agencies and other organizations analyze and communicate the severity of food insecurity and malnutrition. Officials had been cooperating with the IPC amid a devastating civil war that, according to the UN, has brought widespread hunger across the country. However, last week, the Sudan government decided to pull out, accusing it of issuing unreliable reports that undermine Sudan's sovereignty and dignity. The government held a briefing in the temporary capital of Port Sudan to explain, on the one hand, its anger over the revelations, and on another, what the army is being doing to alleviate the suffering in the hardest hit places.
The report referred to 5 states under the threat of famine from October 2024 to February 2025, not already suffering hunger crisis. The report also talked about statistics of 15 states out of 18 states, but they didn't have access on the ground to evaluate the situation, and they relied on old data of 2022 and estimated the figures. It's not accurate nor realistic.
The Sudanese government has delivered over 1,700 trucks of food and aid in the past months for 4 Darfur states, except Al Fashir, as it's being besieged by the RSF militia and they are not allowing aid delivery. There is no hunger crisis, but the RSF is using intentional starvation and should end it now, following the Security Council decision to end the siege of El Fasher.
Fighting broke out in Sudan in April 2023 over a power struggle between the army and a paramilitary group called the Rapid Support Forces, or the RSF. It quickly expanded from the capital Khartoum to affect most parts of the country.
That was Naba Muhyiddin reporting. Now recapping the headlines before we go, a South Korean court has issued a warrant to arrest impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol and search the presidential residence. South Korean police have vowed to speed up the identification of the victims killed in the plane crash on the weekend. And a transit deal allowing Russia to export natural gas to Europe via Ukraine expires. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to the Beijing Hour, a 1-hour podcast news magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Qizhi. Thanks for listening.